The gate agent looked at the passport, then at the calm, older black man in front of her, and made a decision that would end her career. She had no idea the man she was about to publicly accuse of fraud was a senior FAA inspector, and she had no idea his only mission that day was to see if the ugly rumors about her were true. The air at Chicago O'Hare's Gate K-12 was stale, with the scent of lukewarm pretzels and anxiety. Under the relentless fluorescent lights, the gate agent, a woman with sharp features and a name tag reading K. Miller, held the passport like it was a piece of evidence. Her eyes flicked from the photo to the man standing before her, then back again. "You sure this is yours?" she asked, her voice flat. Frank Coleman met her gaze without a flicker of emotion. Yes, 4 complaints in 2 months, he thought, his hands resting calmly on the handle of his briefcase. All pointing right here, to this gate, to this exact kind of treatment. From the outside, he was just another 57-year-old man in a pressed windbreaker, trying to catch a flight to Montreal. That was the point. His power was in being invisible, in observing the system a person at a time. "This doesn't look right," Karen Miller muttered, her fingers tapping impatiently on the worn counter. She let out a small, dismissive scoff. "What's your purpose for visiting Canada?" "Business," Frank answered, his voice even. "What kind of business?" "Transportation." It was the truth, just not the whole truth. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't seem to be listening. She seemed to be searching for a lie. Was this how it always started? A simple question that wasn't really a question at all? "I'm going to need to verify this," she said finally, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "Step to the side." Frank did as he was told, moving a few feet away to lean against a support column. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't sigh in frustration. He just watched. Patience was part of the job. Observation was the entire job. He saw her shake her head as she typed into her terminal. Then she glanced at the next passenger in line, a younger white man in a university sweatshirt, and gave him a look of shared conspiracy, of mutual understanding. "Can you believe this guy?" That's when Frank knew. He felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. This wasn't just another data point for his report. This was the test. And Karen Miller had no idea she was the one being graded. He wasn't the only one watching. Across the boarding area, heads that had been buried in phones were now angled slightly, catching the scene out of the corner of their eyes. People notice things, even when they pretend they don't. Frank remained still. Patience, observation, restraint. He repeated the words in his head. It was the mantra of his profession. But even for a man with 3 decades of experience, there were limits. Karen Miller muttered something under her breath and waved the next passenger forward. It was the young man from before, the one in the university sweatshirt. She glanced at his passport. A wide, practiced smile instantly appeared on her face. "Mr. Gable, have a wonderful trip to Montreal. We'll be boarding in just a few minutes." "Thanks," he said, taking his passport back. The entire exchange took less than 5 seconds. Frank took a slow, deliberate breath. Another passenger, then another. A family with 2 loud kids, a businessman on his phone, a young couple holding hands. Each one was met with a smile, a quick scan, and a pleasant wave through. The line moved smoothly, efficiently, for everyone but him. After 5 minutes that felt like an hour, Frank stepped forward again. "Excuse me," he said, his voice still quiet but firm. "I was just checking on the status of my document verification." Karen didn't even look up from her screen. "Still reviewing," she snapped. Then with a sigh so loud it turned heads, she finally lifted her gaze to meet his. The mask of customer service was gone, replaced by pure annoyance. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you sure this is your passport?" "Yes, I am," Frank said, meeting her stare. "Because this photo," she said, tapping the picture with a long manicured nail, "doesn't look a thing like you." A woman seated nearby gasped softly. She looked from Frank's calm, weathered face to the official photo in the agent's hand and frowned. It was a perfect likeness. "It's a current passport issued last year," Frank stated, keeping his composure. "Where were you born?" she demanded abruptly. "Baltimore," she squinted at him. "And your middle name?" Frank paused for a beat. "Lorenzo." Her eyes narrowed as she typed, a smirk playing on her lips. She had him. She was sure of it. "This looks fake," she declared. And before he could utter another word, she took the passport in both hands and tore it in half. "Ripe!" The sound cut through the low hum of the terminal. A woman behind him gasped. A man muttered, "No way she just did that." The two halves of Frank's passport, his identity, his federal document, lay on the counter like trash. Karen Miller crossed her arms, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. "You'll need to wait for airport security," she announced to the silent crowd. "You may be detained for attempting to travel with forged documents." Frank stared at her, the torn pieces of his life on the counter between them. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. People were no longer pretending not to watch. Phones were out, discreetly recording. Finally, Frank spoke, his voice dangerously low. "I need you to repeat what you just said," she smirked. "You heard me." That's when another voice cut in, a young airline crew member rushing over. "Is there a problem here, Karen?" "I have a potential forgery case," she said, puffed with authority. "I've already destroyed the document." The young man's eyes went wide. "You tore up his passport?" "It was fake," she insisted, turning to Frank. "Sir, do you have another form of ID?" Slowly, deliberately, Frank opened his black leather briefcase. He reached inside and pulled out a slim, government-issue wallet. He didn't hand it over. He simply flipped it open, revealing the gold seal and bold letters of his federal identification. He held it up just long enough for the young crew member's face to drain of all color. "Sir, are you with the FAA?" Frank's voice was like ice. "I am." He snapped the wallet shut and put it away. Karen Miller's face froze, the smugness instantly replaced by a wave of sickening dread. "And I'll be needing the names of every single gate staff member on duty," Frank continued, his voice resonating through the now silent boarding area. Immediately, the smirk was gone. The authority was gone. All that was left was the dawning, horrific realization of what she had just done. "You have just destroyed the passport of a federal inspector conducting a live audit," Frank said, letting each word land with the force of a hammer blow. "You've made public accusations of a felony and denied a passenger boarding without cause. I suggest you call your supervisor, now." Frank didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just stood there, a picture of absolute control as Karen Miller's world crumbled around her. Her face, once a mask of smug authority, was now pale. Her arms folded across her chest weren't a sign of defiance anymore. They were a desperate attempt to hold herself together. The young crew member was already on his radio, speaking quickly in hushed tones. The whispers in the crowd grew louder. "I knew something was off with her attitude," a man holding a tablet muttered to his wife. "She was all sugar and smiles to the folks before him. Then he walks up, and she just flips a switch." An older gate agent from across the hall caught Karen's eye and gestured for her to come over. But she was frozen. Instead, she turned back to Frank, her voice now a strained whisper. "Look, I'm sure we can work this out, without it becoming something bigger." Frank's gaze was like granite. "You made it something bigger the moment you decided my identity was false." She flinched as if he'd struck her. The words weren't loud, but they landed with the weight of a final judgment. Just then, a security guard, Sergeant Bill Donovan, arrived, looking confused. "Everything all right here?" Frank turned his head slowly. "She destroyed a federal document, mine, without cause." The sergeant blinked. You want to file a report, sir?" A woman in the front row of seats laughed sharply. "Oh, he's more than filing a report. Check your phone." Another passenger held his up. "It's already on Twitter. Posted it 2 minutes ago. It's climbing fast." Desperate, Karen turned to the guard. "He refused to comply with document verification." "That's a lie," Frank interrupted calmly. "I handed you a valid U.S. passport. I answered your questions. I stood aside when you asked. The video footage will show that." He gestured to a security camera on the ceiling. "And that camera right above us will show it too." Sergeant Donovan's hand instinctively went to his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, confirm surveillance availability at Gate K-12. We have a possible federal matter." The click-clack of determined heels on the tile floor announced a new player. A woman in a crisp navy blue blazer carrying a clipboard approached them, her badge reading, "Susan Albright, Zone Supervisor." "Ms. Miller," she said, her voice firm and direct. "Come with me." "Now." Karen hesitated for a second, then followed like a ghost, her face ashen. The supervisor then turned to Frank. "Sir, may I have a word with you privately?" "Of course," Frank nodded. As they walked toward a sterile hallway near the jet bridge, the sea of phones remained up. The verdict was already in. The court of public opinion doesn't wait for official statements. The hallway was colder. The air inside the small beige interview room was colder still. It was a room built for tense conversations, with a table bolted to the floor and a humming vent overhead. Susan Albright closed the door, her expression all business. She was no longer a supervisor. She was a crisis manager. "I'm Susan Albright," she began. "I need to get everything on the record, Mr. Coleman, Frank Coleman." He reached into his briefcase, pulled out the slim government wallet containing his credentials, and slid it across the table. She picked it up. Her eyes scanned the gold seal, the official photo, the ID number. She went rigid. You're conducting an inspection?" "I was," Frank said plainly, until it turned into something else. Susan Albright let out a slow, controlled breath. The clipboard on her lap suddenly seemed useless. "I see," she said, her voice tight. "I need to inform my terminal director and the airport police." "I assumed as much," Frank said. "You might want to retrieve the full surveillance footage from gate K-12 while you're at it. Every angle." The terminal office was a pressure cooker. Susan Albright's sleeves were rolled up, her face grim. She was joined by two others who had been pulled into the firestorm. Robert "Bob" Shaw, a bulldog of a regional manager, and Jessica Stone, the airline's top lawyer for the region, whose expression was made of polished ice. "We are fully committed to investigating this incident," Jessica began, her voice smooth and rehearsed, as if addressing a press conference. "And we will cooperate with all relevant federal agencies." Frank sat across from them, his federal ID still resting on the table, a silent testament to the gravity of the situation. "I'm sure you are," he said. "But let's be clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Your employee publicly destroyed a federal document after accusing me of a felony." Bob Shaw leaned forward. "We understand emotions were running high. Mine weren't." Frank cut him off, his voice quiet but absolute. The room fell silent. That one sentence dismantled their entire strategy. Jessica Stone changed tactics. "Mr. Coleman, what are your intentions? Are you planning to pursue legal action?" "I'm not here to discuss lawsuits," he said, his gaze sweeping across their anxious faces. "I'm here to complete my audit." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder, placing it on the table with a soft thud that echoed in the silent room. He opened it. "This is my preliminary report for FAA Internal Affairs. It also includes a pattern of complaints filed against your airline over the last 8 months. 5 of them originated at gate K-12. 4 of them," he paused, letting his eyes rest on each executive, "named Miss Karen Miller specifically." He slid one of the complaint summaries across the table. "And all 4 of those complaints were filed by minority travelers. Black men, Hispanic men. They all described the exact same pattern of behavior: baseless suspicion, a condescending attitude, and being treated like a potential criminal from the moment they presented their ID." He looked directly into Jessica Stone's eyes. "Does any of that sound familiar to you?" The air went out of the room. It was no longer just about a destroyed passport. Frank had just laid the evidence of systemic, racially motivated misconduct on the table, and his own experience was the irrefutable proof. Susan Albright visibly paled. Bob Shaw looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Just then, a junior staffer rushed in, holding a tablet. "It's on CNN," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And MSNBC. The passenger video, it has over 2 million views." Jessica Stone's composure finally cracked. "If we arrange a meeting with our Diversity and Inclusion Division, would you be willing to join?" Frank looked at her, a hint of pity in his eyes. "My responsibility is to report the facts. It's not to help you write a better press release." He stood up, collected his folder, and slid it back into his briefcase. He looked at the executives, now scrambling in the wreckage of their own making. "You have a very small window to make this right," he said, "and it's closing fast." He walked out of the office and back into the main terminal. The whispers didn't stop, but the tone had changed. It was no longer just shock. It was respect. A woman with a toddler strapped to her chest gave him a quiet thumbs up. An older man in a business suit gave him a firm, respectful nod. Frank didn't gesture back. This was never about him. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel small at that counter. And as he walked toward his new gate, it was clear the story no longer belonged to the airline. It belonged to everyone. The airline's regional control office was a digital war room, but they were losing the war. Monitors that usually showed weather patterns and flight paths were now filled with the viral video of Gate K-12. The same clip playing on a sickening loop. Jessica Stone, the airline's top lawyer, stood in the center of the chaos. "This is past damage control," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "This is containment. What's the latest? A tech swiveled his chair. The FAA just issued a statement. They've confirmed Frank Coleman was conducting a live inspection tied directly to profiling allegations at O'Hare. Before anyone could react, another supervisor burst in. It's worse. Someone just posted an old clip from LAX. A similar situation, a different passenger. Guess who the gate agent was? Jessica Stone didn't even have to ask. Miller. Yep, the supervisor confirmed. She had a reputation even before she transferred here. The final nail in the coffin. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern of behavior they had imported and ignored. Jessica looked at Bob Shaw and Susan Albright, their faces pale. The time for excuses was over. The time for corporate statements was over. Get her on the phone, Jessica commanded, and get security to meet her at the employee exit. Her access is revoked, effective immediately. She does not take one more step in this terminal as an employee. The final reckoning came not with a bang, but with a quiet, humiliating walk. Karen Miller was met at the door of the employee lounge by two stone-faced security guards and Susan Albright, who held a plain cardboard box. Your personal effects, Susan said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Your badge and all other airline property now. Wordlessly, Karen handed over her ID, the plastic card that had given her so much power. She was no longer Kay Miller, gate agent. She was just a woman in a polyester uniform, holding a box of cheap desk ornaments. She was escorted through a service hallway, a walk of shame designed to avoid the public eye. But at the final turn toward the parking garage, she saw him, the young crew member who had tried to intervene. He was walking with Sergeant Donovan, the security guard from the gate. They stopped, not to gloat, but simply because she was in their path. The young man looked at her, then at the box in her hands and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of pity or of triumph. It was a nod of finality. The system had worked. Justice was done.